At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu. With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Today's episode was recorded on December 11th, the day after International Human Rights Day, which Jose Antonio Vargas references in the show. But it was also before this recent escalation with the murder of Renee Good in Minneapolis last week and 2 people shot by ICE agents in Portland. And so I wanted to preface today's show by saying that I have attended these ICE trainings myself. The impulse to protect your own community against lawlessness and kidnapping is a very humane response. When the administration calls anyone who's doing these ICE watches radical or extreme or worse, a domestic terrorist, it is absolute insanity. These watches are basically the equivalent of a neighborhood watch where they train you what to do, how to behave, and essentially to try to hold ICE agents accountable for their actions, because we can see with our own eyes and with countless video that they are not accountable for their actions. This is not a political show, but we are political, and there is no way not to be political given the kinds of guests we have, the stories they're sharing, the lives they're living and writing on the page. I'm so grateful for Jose Antonio Vargas's insights on today's show and what he has to say about how very warped our thinking is around immigration and what it means, and who gets celebrated for immigrating and who gets demonized for immigrating. I hope you enjoy the show, and let us not back down on the pressure to get these agents out of our communities. Thank you.
Hello, immigrants, emigrants, travelers, searchers, boundary crossers, home seekers. I'm Grant Faulkner, and I'm with my co-host, Brooke Warner. And Brooke, I have to say we have another guest on the show today who just rocked my world with his book. You know, it's just so transformative in the way I look at the world now. And I'm talking about Jose Antonio Vargas's very daring memoir about his life as an undocumented American. It's called Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen. And one thing that the book taught me was just how I'm sometimes overwhelmed by a book's buzz, and I can, sometimes oddly retreat in such circumstances instead of being pulled in. I'll often read the headlines, but not immerse myself in the subject. And, in this case, I knew Jose Antonio Vargas's story because he'd won the Pulitzer, and he'd published a really daring op-ed in the New York Times in 2011 because he basically outed himself. Well, he did out himself as an undocumented immigrant. And, he risked deportation and has risked it since then by writing that op-ed. But I didn't really know his story. And reading his memoir was just a good reminder of how many layers of depths you get from reading, a skillful memoir instead of just listening to a podcast with the author or something like that. And the other thing, which I want to talk a lot about, is how Jose's memoir is just the perfect example of a memoir about a very particular life that succeeds because of the universal truths it speaks to and engages with. And Jose and I have nearly completely different lives, yet his memoir just made me think deeply about my life and my Americanness and what it means to be an American in general. And that's the universal, is how some of us have homes here, and then some of us don't really.
Yeah, it's a good point, Grant. And these are such eye-opening memoirs. I mean, I do really feel that I've expanded my own understanding so much by reading immigration narratives. And so I am very excited to interview Jose. He has long been on my radar, actually. And this is a very important book in this canon of literature about people making their way to America and what the undocumented experience is like. And there's also a theme of homelessness in Jose's work, not homeless in the sense of living on the streets, but homeless because he doesn't have a home country. And he has been in the States since he was 12. His mother sent him here from the Philippines to live with his grandparents, and she was supposed to follow, but then couldn't. He didn't know anything about green cards or the immigration process at age 12, of course, and yet he had to live a hidden life, hiding his legal standing, existing without a home because he could be deported at any time. And it's hard not to wonder about the terror that undocumented people are feeling right now about their status, given our current hostile ICE raids too, Grant. I mean, I even think about it for people with green cards, and people are being threatened even if they are naturalized citizens. We're just in a really awful time.
Yeah, terror is the right word, maybe even a word more than terror, if that exists. I definitely want to talk with him about how he feels living in the America of today when he's so publicly documented his undocumented status. You know, it's just got to be so harrowing, as you mentioned. And just to let readers know, one part of Jose's story is actually personal to me because he lives on the same street as me, and we experience so much through the headlines. And for me, like scrolling on my phone, so many stories are kind of zipping by me, and they're not really making enough of a deep impression, I don't think. And I think that's what's been so interesting about the ICE roundups and the deportations is that some of the people who actually voted for Trump didn't see the people in their own neighborhoods and towns as people who could be hostilely deported. And once you know someone who that happens to, it obviously transforms your view of the horrible ways we're treating people. But I want to pick back up on the theme of being homeless, of being in between. He's not talking about a typical like homelessness as we typically think about it. But Jose's, he's in between countries, the Philippines and America. But he's also in between races in America because of his first name, Jose. People oftentimes think he's Mexican. And he discusses how little people here know about Asian immigrants because he puts forward that when we talk about race, we tend to talk about black and white. And as I read this, I had to think about my privilege, how I have always felt this country is my home. No one has ever treated me otherwise, and I've never questioned it. So instead of feeling homeless, I actually feel home as it's a type of superpower, really. Like when I travel in foreign countries, I know that nothing too bad is likely to happen to me because I've got this big, powerful country behind me. And I have a confidence because I don't have to worry about the police stopping me because of, racial profiling, or that I'll be picked up by ICE when I drop my kids off at school. So I live without that anxiety being part of my life every day and every minute, really. And it must be just so exhausting and so limiting. And Jose writes, home is not something I should have to earn. And that's absolutely right, because I didn't earn this home I have. I just was born into it. So, Brooke, I know you've actually experienced our current national terror by the Trump administration through a friend of yours who was one of the immigration judges in San Francisco. And several judges were literally fired suddenly for political reasons. So I was wondering if you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I think it's so important because this story I'm about to share shows the full impact of the administration's reach and just how devastating and, like I said, far-reaching these punitive immigration policies are because, we're talking about, of course, it's much worse for the undocumented immigrants who are being rounded up. Oftentimes, by the way, we know they are citizens and they're still being rounded up. But, there's like these ripple effects, right? And so this particular friend is a family that we know from my son's school, and the dad was one of the immigration judges who was fired in what's being called the Friday Night Massacre. 5 liberal judges who were fired from the San Francisco Immigration Court. Our friend had been not joking, really, ever since Trump got reelected and after DOJ came into office and started chainsawing its way through the federal government. But anyway, he was saying, like, I have my bags packed. And so he had been expecting to get fired. And nevertheless, it was incredibly shocking and still so upsetting when it actually happened. And it was also just so unceremonious. And it was the Friday before Thanksgiving, which is just such a warped way to, do something to a family, or many families actually, right before the holiday season. Our friend is a former Marine, and he had been an immigration judge for 12 years. And Politico actually wrote a story about all of the firing of these liberal judges, not limited to San Francisco, by the way. I mean, it's across the country. So Dan Goldman, who is a congressman in New York, said, by firing immigration judges whose rulings he does not like, President Trump is installing himself as the judge and jury of his own decisions. To say that this is a concern is an understatement, obviously. I mean, judges should be able to rule in the ways that they see fit. And just with my proximity to this judge that I'm good friends with, I'll tell you, like, over the years, he has talked with us about what that role is, what that responsibility is to make sure that the people that he is seeing in his courts actually understand what he's saying, that he is getting them translators. He is making sure that, he understands their circumstances, that they understand theirs. It really takes a kind and conscientious kind of person to do this job. And that is not the people that they're going to be replaced with. It's a job that's about granting asylum and safety to the people who really have good reason to be here, who are hardworking, who have jobs, who are paying their taxes and contributing to the community. So the entire thing around immigration, and I know you feel the same way, Grant, is just one of the absolute cruelest things that is happening in our country right now. And I will go so far as to say that it's demonic, that the administration's war in this regard is on human beings. And I just want to read one more quote here from the Political piece. This came from Judge Jennifer Payton. She was fired in Chicago under circumstances very similar to my friend's. She said, "We all felt like you can't do more damage than you already have to immigration courts and to justice and to due process. Yet it's like, hold my beer, watch this," she said. New York is decimated. Chelmsford, Massachusetts is decimated. The San Francisco court is decimated. Chicago is half down. There are millions with an M, millions of cases that are pending. And it's just so unconscionable, Grant. It's like when we read about these things, experiences like this, I start to feel like I truly do not recognize this country. And it really makes me angry and sad and terrified all at once. And, all that said, I'm so glad that Jose is there to speak to this experience in such a profound way.
Profound is the word. When I read those headlines in the paper, they're just so consistently disturbing, especially to see little kids just separated from their parents and left behind. And I don't know what to do so often, but I do feel like it's our mission to get stories like Jose's out there. And in fact, I was telling a friend the other day that if Jose's memoir was required reading for the country, we wouldn't be experiencing the injustices that we are, so stories really do change the world. But storytelling isn't just about unearthing these untold stories. It's also about finding who we are through stories. And just for the writers who are listening, I want to give one example of that. We had Matthew Salasis on the podcast several years ago, and he's the author of Craft in the Real World, one of my favorite books on writing, as well as a number of novels that he's written. And I was on a webcast with him once, and he gave this writing exercise that I thought was brilliant for kind of revealing who you are in the world, but also seeing the world through others' eyes if you write different types of characters in this exercise. And it's really simple. So imagine it's nighttime. Your car is parked in a vacant lot. No one is around. So the question is, how do you walk to the car? What kinds of fear do you carry with you? Do you run? Do you position your key between your fingers to defend yourself? Or do you saunter your car in a daydream, not really, kind of oblivious to danger? And I think it's a very revealing question for how you feel your power or your powerlessness in the world. And it's interesting to do this exercise for other people or characters in your stories. For example, as a straight white man, I generally walk to my car without too many fears. But if I were a woman or a person of color or an elderly person, I might walk with much more wariness.
And it's wonderful that you have that self-awareness and that you can understand that and name it, because not everybody does, certainly. Unfortunately, the narrative that the far right is trying to spin as well is that somehow white people are unsafe and that white men are being discriminated against. And, obviously it's so complicated. And I do understand, because I've been reading through a lot of the reckoning of the left getting handed its lunch, why did that happen? And a lot of the grievances are legitimate and many mistakes have been made, but that doesn't ever justify the cruelty that we're witnessing. And I want to say it doesn't negate the privilege that we have as first as being white and then, for people who are male, because just as a woman, I do feel scared to walk at night. Absolutely. And I always have. And, but back to the cruelty of what we're witnessing right now, just the inhumane treatment of other people, the recklessness, just so many things. And you cannot look at that without seeing that it's all of a piece, right? And it's about not valuing lives, especially the lives of people of color. And I want to read this quote from Jose's book: "White as the default, white as the center, white as the norm is the central part of the master narrative. The centrality of whiteness, how it's constructed, white versus black, legal versus illegal, hurts not only people of color who aren't white, but also white people who can't carry the burden of what they've constructed." So powerful, really. Part of our power of feeling a home comes from the centrality of whiteness in this country, and we do take it for granted. And what's so challenging here is that we're brought face to face with this. We were brought face to face with this, during the social justice movement. And a lot of white people, in my opinion, I mean, my friends, myself, I will say, we went through an overhaul in our thinking. And I think we did make huge progress for that struggle. I personally feel like I learned and changed profoundly, but then there was a backlash, and here we are. And I have to say, it's so important that those of us who are, passionate about these causes stay the course, continue to fight, try to open our own eyes and other people's eyes to white privilege, even if, it's under this construct of DEI, because it doesn't matter, what it's called doesn't matter. Progress gets weaponized, unfortunately. And that's why, Grant, let's bring it back to Memoir. Memoir is a vehicle for change and progress. And we have talked about that. But here with Jose, we're seeing that in such stark terms where everything is at stake, because it helps us to see other people's lives, and they help us to see beyond our lives and invite us to another's experience, which is what you opened with, this power of universality.
Yeah, and I've grown so passionate about this in the last few years. As you know, I'm a somewhat recent memoir enthusiast, and I'm somewhat obsessed with the way memoirs have moved, so many important cultural conversations forward. And Jose says you have to change the culture before you can change the laws. And I think that's absolutely right. I just want to pause and pay heed to the memoirs that have helped us understand things like addiction and sexual abuse and terminal illness and poverty and homosexuality and issues with motherhood and fatherhood and childhood and more. So many of those things were taboo subjects just 20 or 30 years ago, and some of them still are. And our national conversations, though, have just evolved so much in my lifetime. And I think memoir has been a key driver in those conversations. So I think, memoir should be more celebrated, more recognized as a genre, which is why we're here. But I know you disagree with everything I just said, right, Bert?
Yeah, obviously I do not disagree. For me, it stems from personal experience always. I have been personally changed by memoir, and I have seen other people be touched or changed. A personal story changes culture, it changes people's lives, and it saves people's lives. I've witnessed it firsthand, that someone loses a child or is going through a mental health crisis or is suicidal, you name it, whatever it is, and you pick up a book and that person is a lifeline. It's so profound. And so I know your growing passion is meeting mine, and that's where Memoir Nation sprang from. And I just love that. We had Right Minded for 7 years, and then something just clicked into place for both of us, and it felt right to pivot to memoir. And this conversation we're having right now is really at the heart of why. And I think it's safe to say that our listeners agree with us too, because, here we are, this crew of memoir enthusiasts, and there are a lot of us, and Jose Antonio Vargas is really on the forefront of this kind of thing. You think about the people that he's touched with his work, and also the courage that he's given to other people in his situation. So very excited to hear from him after this short break, everybody.
Well, Brooke, since listeners can't see us, I rarely compliment you on your attire or your keen fashion sense, but today I'm going to make an exception. And I got to say, that is one stylish t-shirt you're wearing. Just for our listeners' sake, it says, "I was there at word one, Memoir Nation." And we also have another shirt, and I'm going to buy this one for you as a gift. And it says, OM, Original Memoirist, and I'm buying it for you because you are an original memoirist in my book, because you not only helped educate me about the genre, but you co-founded Memoir Nation, of course, which I want to let listeners know they should join to take part in our writing challenge to write 500 words each day this month. And you can still join us. Please join us and join a whole community of encouraging writers.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. I want to just say I'll take the compliment. It is a pretty spiffy t-shirt after all. It's a t-shirt we made to honor all of those memoirists who have joined us to help launch Memoir Nation and who are doing Jan Your Story. And there are several variations, in fact. So I really like this one. I was here at Word One because it's kind of a memento to celebrate our beginnings. And I'm going to post a photo of it so people can see it. We'll put it on our social media. And it's a collector's item, of course. I mean, it says 2025, so we've already, launched and we're out there in the world. And then we have mugs and hoodies. We even have a hip pack. So there's going to be more merch to come. And we hope people will come check out our store, which you can access through our website.
Yeah, it's true. These items are likely to fetch hundreds of dollars in years to come on eBay. So buy them, preserve them, keep them in vintage condition.
Mintage condition.
Mintage condition. I like that. And I actually bought T-shirts for my whole family. And we don't do the family and matching pajamas photo for our Christmas card. So I'm thinking maybe we'll do the family of memoirists next year.
I love that. And I want to say before we end this little ad spot that the shirt is comfortable. Thank God. That was what I was waiting for. I was really nervous that it was going to be scratchy, but it is good cotton. Yay to the company that makes them. So listeners, buy a shirt, buy a mug, buy a hip pack, but more than that, keep writing. I can't tell you how galvanizing Jan Your Story has been this month. It has been an invitation to write to hundreds of writers. I have written, I have to confess, not every single day, but on the days that I haven't written, I have caught up the next day. So I have been watering my underwatered memoir. I'm seeing it grow, which feels like a relief after all of these months. So we encourage you to go to the Memoir Nation website, click on the Jan Your Story tab. It is definitely not too late to join. You could even join on January 30th and you could still write for 2 days and we'd be super happy to see you there.
Even the 31st.
Absolutely.
And remember, it's free because we want to open the doorway to everyone's story because your story matters. We'll see you at Memoir Nation.
Oh, and if you want to get a shirt, you can find that on the website too. Just go to store and see you there.
Good sales. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I am super excited, super thrilled to talk about our theme today of immigration because Jose Antonio Vargas, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, Emmy-nominated filmmaker, and Tony-nominated theatrical producer, just has so many interesting and insightful thoughts about his own experience, and I think it will change your own thoughts about who you are as an American. Jose is a leading voice for the human rights of immigrants. He founded the nonprofit immigrant storytelling organization Define American, and he explores all facets of immigration as host of its YouTube show and podcast, Define American with Jose Antonio Vargas. And Jose's best-selling memoir, Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, that's what we're talking about mainly today. It was published by HarperCollins in 2018, and an updated edition with new material for Living in Trump's America was released in June 2025. And his second book, White is Not a Country, which is a working title, will examine America's foundational black and white racial binary and where everyone else fits within and outside that binary. Welcome, Jose.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, man, it's such a treat. And this is obviously, unfortunately, so timely. And way back in college, I oftentimes think about this because I was introduced to the Greek oracle's command to know thyself, which sounds very simple. I often think about how challenging it is to truly know yourself and how it's a lifelong process. But the more you know yourself, it's also a type of superpower. And in the last 10 years or so, especially, I've been peeling away the layers of my own privilege, and it seems endless in a way. And that's why I'm so interested in your book and your title. I just have been thinking a lot about the title, Dear America. And as I read your book, I really felt like it was an invitation for a person like me to think a lot about what my own Americanness means, and in a bunch of different ways. Since I grew up kind of I grew up in this town that was almost 100% white in Iowa, this small town. And I've always felt like this country is my home. I've never had to doubt it or question it. So I was wondering if you can tell us more about your title, Dear America.
Well, I need to give my editor credit for the title because it's not what I wanted the title to be. I think my original title is Why I'm Here. I think literally the title I put it when I finished the draft. And then Julia Chaffetz, the editor, I remember her telling me this. She said, immigration books don't sell, Jose. This was 2018, late winter, early spring. We were publishing in the fall in September, right? It was a quick turnaround. And this was before, thankfully now there's a canon, right? Solito by Ora, there's Beautiful Country, but there's now Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. But back then, immigration books don't sell. And I needed a title that would get people who don't want to read immigration books. And the moment she said that, I kept thinking, wait a second, you mean in this country where unless you're Native American or a Black person who was imported here through the, descendants of enslaved people, everyone's an immigrant. And yet people don't want to, unless Angela's ashes, unless it's coming from this Irish, Italian, right? Already in the beginning, I was like, oh, man. So, however, I do think, to your point, Grant, I don't know if people can read this as they're reading the book. The book for me is really a conversation with myself, and I want to kind of invite other people in. And you can tell in the book, I had to recently reread it when I was writing this updated version. And I could sense how I was fighting myself throughout the book. How I was literally like, I'm a journalist. Now I'm this public person, whatever that even means. And I'm also trying to make sense of this life that now I have to face while dealing with people who don't have to face their own lives. Do you know what I mean? It's like
totally
like this idea, to your point, and thank you for giving context about your own awakening. I spent a month and a half in the great state of Iowa. You have 99 counties. I've been to every single.
I know.
In every single. There were 4 Starbucks. I know this because that's where I filed all my stories when I was in Iowa for those month and a half filing, covering the Iowa caucuses. And I remember thinking to myself, that was the whitest place I'd ever been at that point in my life. And I was thinking to myself, how did these people get here? How did they populate Iowa? Who are these people? Right? But there's something else before that. So that was kind of the beginning of the inquiry around migration and why people move. And again, why am I here? Well, why are you here? Right? It's a very existential question that I think when it comes to dealing with immigration, we don't really excavate and interrogate that. We're kind of at the surface, which is the law. Well, who makes laws? Right?
Exactly.
Well, that leads into my next question really beautifully, actually, which is about your thoughts on language and the way that we frame stories of immigration. Specifically, I'm going to read a couple of things that you wrote. Why are white people called expats while people of color are called immigrants? What's the difference between a settler and a refugee? Language itself is a barrier to information, a fortress against understanding the inalienable instinct of human beings to move. And then also, and I just think it's important to say these words for, I'm sure many of our listeners have read your book, but some haven't. And so we're putting into context, such important observations. When white people move, then and now, it's seen as courageous and necessary, celebrated in history books. Yet when people of color move, legally or illegally, the migration is subjected to questions of legality. Is it a crime? Will they assimilate? When will they stop? It just reminded me you were just sort of posing these questions. Can you talk more about how the language we use to discuss immigration is its own type of deportation or prison?
To me, the fact that we can even ask that question is of important consequence. I mean, we're writers, and so I think that, and I'm saying that as we live in a post-literate country. My nieces and nephews in their 20s remind me of this constantly because they've grown up with me, right? And they usually would text in a group text. They would send me things like, in this media era, podcasters, YouTubers are like at the top, and journalists and writers are like at the bottom. And then they would say like, "I'm sorry, uncle." Right? And then I would say to them something like, "This is the problem. The problem is more than ever, we need writers and editors to help curate our world. They're not elitists. They're not gatekeepers." I mean, I think in the past, I mean, certainly as someone who's familiar with the Acela Express of journalism, right? That kind of East Coast thing. Yeah, that is gatekeeping. That is elitism. But I think something else has emerged. And I think when it comes to immigration, the gatekeeping of language and the vocabulary we use is at the center of the moral bankruptcy of this whole, not even issue, right? The whole, even now, we wake up, I don't know about you, but I woke up at 4:00 this morning and I've given myself like a 30-minute limit. Like I can only read immigration news or watch videos for 30 minutes and then I'm out because it's just too much. And all of this is happening and we're all going on in our days as if people aren't being kidnapped, like as we're speaking, as if people are not. And for what? And why? And yet why, thankfully you're seeing some semblance of hope in action when people are like organizing. And, that I saw that video of 1,000 people showed up in a meeting in New York, hands off New York, right? To make sure that what happens when ICE shows up. So you're seeing some of that, like when the raids started happening in North Carolina, I love seeing the video of all those high school kids who staged protests and lockdown. But for the most part, we're going on about our day as if the strawberries that land in our salads doesn't come from somewhere, as if we're here in Silicon Valley. The oceanic gap between H-1B engineers and startup immigrant founders and farmers in the Central Valley, that gap right there, which is only probably 2 hours away from each other, and yet the narrative around them couldn't be any deeper in terms of the gap. So language for me is at the heart of this. And yesterday was International Human Rights Day. I celebrated this. The Heising Simons Foundation did an event in San Francisco. And to me, it was a reminder of we're dealing in a world where there's 310 million migrants. That is the most we'd ever seen the world. Of the 310 million, this according to the UN, 52 million are in the United States. Globally, that 310 million represent 4% of the world's population. That is it, 4%. And yet, the Western world as we know it is collapsing. And then I asked myself, wait a second, back to the inquiry around when are white people expats? Right? This is a world shaped by colonialism and imperialism. I'm Filipino. I know everything about that, right? And yet, you would think the way we cover this, the way migration is covered globally, is this crisis, right? As if it came from nowhere, when in reality, colonialism, capitalism, billionaires, like shape so much of that. So what I'm hoping is there's now a whole canon of work that has emerged. Dear America is just one part of our canon. I hope that creating this new language and a new vocabulary that puts migrants at the center, that really interrogates and makes connections about why is it that white people are what? Maybe 10, maybe 15% of the world, right? Population-wise, we're talking about North America, Europe, Australia. If you combine all those populations, that's like 10 to 15% of the world, right? Most of the world is Asian and Black. Those are the two largest groups of people in the world. And when it comes to migration, which is an Asian issue and a Black issue globally, I think the language around it needs to center the voices that are directly impacted, and then they get to interrogate why are the systems the way that they are.
Well, that's interesting, Jose. And I've been thinking about your initial title, Why I'm Here, which really is what the book is about. And that is the transformative nature of the book, because it's not a book about policies per se. It's about your story. And Brooke and I both talk about the power of storytelling and the power of memoir in particular, and how stories have to shape our culture in order to change policies. And you put it perfectly when you say you cannot change the politics of immigration until you change the culture in which immigrants are seen. And I'm interested in how we change that culture. And I know that you take it on. I know that you've appeared on shows, on Fox News, and you're not just speaking to the left. So I'm just curious, do you think we can change our culture? How do you see it changing?
Well, I started this nonprofit with a group of friends. I can't believe it. 15 years ago, around this time is when I was getting ready I was about to be 30, and I was getting ready to come out as undocumented. And I thought to myself, okay, I was so naive. I thought, okay, let me take this little career detour. I was a working journalist at the time, and let me just come out as undocumented, come out for the second time in my life. The gay thing came first. And let me work on this for like 2-3 years, and then I'll go move on with my journalism career. Like, I did not think that this would be like my life. And for me, from the very beginning, I was looking at the LGBTQ model, right? Like, it's still stunning to me. Clearly it's not perfect. I think the battle about trans issues is as much about masculinity and patriarchy as it is about LGBTQ issues. For the most part, we have made great strides on LGBTQ issues in this country. And how did that happen? I grew up, Will and Grace to me was a touchstone. And what was beautiful about Will and Grace is it wasn't just about Will, it was about Grace, right? So meaning for every gay person, there's the straight friend. So that model for me was really interesting, and kind of translate that to immigrants about for every undocumented person in this country, there's like 10, 15, 20 people who are U.S. citizens who get to be a part of this unsolvable problem that is immigration in this country. So when it comes to creating a cultural strategy, that was at the heart of it from the beginning. And to me, looking back now, 15 years doing this work, we need a more coordinated effort to make sure. So our work at Define American, so please check it out, defineamerican.com, is if you're a storyteller of any kind, right? If you're a writer, an author, for example, we deal with authors who are trying to create, for example, undocumented characters in their novels. So they go to us. There's a big author who's another person who has a novel, and they're going to put an undocumented person in it and wanted to know the ins and outs of legality and all of that. So we connected that author with a lawyer and blah. So if you're an author, a screenwriter, a producer, a director, a journalist, an influencer, a gamer, right now we have a strategy that's about 2 months old. We're working with gamers in streaming platforms because, I don't have teenage kids or kids in their 20s who play games. And I guess they play it together on Twitch. I'm sorry, I didn't notice. I just found this out 2 years ago. So now we actually have a cultural strategy dealing with gamers and how they can integrate and talk about immigration as they're playing their games. So we have a coordinated cultural strategy that is not just one medium. To me, it's all mediums. It's books, it's films, it's TV, it's theater, it's games, it's podcasting. So that's our way of doing it at Define American. And this has to be a coordinated effort. In a way, everything that's happened in this country in the past 10 years, you have a president that's gotten elected twice, making immigration the central issue of both of his campaigns to be elected president. That's not an accident. And he has an entire media ecosystem, the Great Replacement Network, backing him up. On our side, we do not. So in a way, at Define America and talk about David versus Goliath, that's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to be responsible storytellers. So if you want to write an immigrant story, you need to make sure that you know not only the facts, and my friend Ai-Jin Poo has introduced me to this whole term around. There are the facts, right? And then there's the emotional truths. There's the emotional facts. So how do you make sure that you can navigate all those things? And if you need help, please go to us and we will help you.
That's awesome work. I'm so glad that you explained that. Thank you, Jose. All three of us live in Berkeley, and I think I can say, for both Grant and I, that we feel safe in our neighborhoods. And I'm curious to ask you about what it feels like, because ICE could appear at any time. There has been, a lot of organization here in Berkeley and certainly in San Francisco trying to resist what's happening in Chicago from happening here. In your own writing, you said, and I think this is so powerful, I refuse to let a presidency scare me from my own country. I refuse to live a life of fear defined by a government that doesn't even know why it fears what it fears. This stuff is so important. And you write that citizenship is more about, showing up, and it's about using your own voice. And I agree with that. And yet, to be undocumented right now in this presidency with this administration, I don't know how that feels. And I imagine, our audience might like to hear from you. How does it feel to live every day under this regime?
Huge shout out, by the way, to my editor, Carrie Thornton, who agreed to update Dear America after Trump was elected for the second time. And she had me do the epilogue of the book. And Day Street, by the way, is the publisher. And Carrie, I was texting with Carrie when I was in Mexico. So in the epilogue, I wrote about taking advantage of this Biden. There was this Biden program that I had heard about last year that would allow me to adjust my status. The biggest lie I've broken is I have admitted to lying about being a U.S. citizen. That's why I was able to get jobs, right? I had a career as a journalist, lying at the Washington Post about who I was, so I could write, I could be a reporter. And that lying about being a U.S. citizen is the reason why I can't become a U.S. citizen. So when I was informed of this not loophole, it's something that I could take advantage of, and so I did. I had to leave the country for the first time since arriving here in 1993 and then apply to try to get back. So I left Christmas Day and I was in Mexico from the 25th to the 30th. And then thankfully was allowed back in. So I have what's called, I joke that it's called the Melania Trump visa. It's this extraordinary ability visa. So it expires 2 more years. It's 3 years. So almost 1 year is up to 2 more years. I don't know if they're going to renew it. I think I'm certainly going to reapply to get it renewed, but we don't know. I have one of those LinkedIn accounts where I can tell who's searching for me. A few months ago, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security was looking at my LinkedIn account. So I was like, oh, okay, this might not be a good sign. I've recorded the video in front of my mom and my grandma who now live with me, basically saying, if you're watching this video, it means I've been detained. So I recorded it in front of them just so they know that I'm prepared that this may happen, right? At any point. So it's just preparing. I don't make any moves without talking to my lawyers, and I'm very privileged to have lawyers. And actually, very recently, about a week ago, I've decided that I am gonna go back to the Philippines this coming year to accompany my grandmother and my mom. My grandmother's 88. I want to go back to where she moved from. She moved from the provinces of Zambales to Mountain View in 1984. I want to trace that migration starting with her in 1984. And I can go to the Philippines because now I have this thing, but there's no guarantee that I would be allowed back when I come back. So I already, after telling a few people, they're like, you might want to reconsider. Can you wait until the Trump administration's done? And my answer so far, this gets to your question, Brooke, is, I'm going to be 45. I am not, thankfully, hopefully, I don't know where that is. Is that just middle age now? I think that's just, I actually have to keep telling myself that I'm free. That I, as a person, as a person, I'm free. It's this government that keep telling me that I'm not. So the tension between those two things is what I grapple with. And the whole world is out there. That, that phrase, citizen of the world, I really grapple with that. Like, what does that mean? So I think I'm about to put that to test in the next few months, and we'll see what happens.
Wow, that's quite a story. And Jose, when I first heard that part of it, or just an inkling of that part of your story, it was I think it was a Labor Day weekend. We had a block party, and you said, "Hey, my mom's coming next week," or something like that. And then you mentioned you hadn't seen her. I think you said 32 years, and your sister's with you too. And I was just wondering. I mean, that's again, it's that question where I never felt like I didn't have a home. I always lived with my parents, all that kind of stuff, very traditional. What is your relationship like with your mom after not seeing her for so long?
I don't have language for that yet. So my mom, if anybody who read the book knows that the book ends with literally my mom telling me on the phone, maybe it's time to come home. And, when my friends read that back in 2018, they literally thought I was going to leave. And because I was, I wrote Dear America. That was what I was thinking. I was like, you know what? I can't keep living my life like this. When does it actually start? And then not realizing that, oh, wait, this is the life. Like, I just have to, right? Like, it is what it is. So, and now, because of my mom was waiting for a green card 25 years or so. So it got approved. She arrived in February. And then I moved her into this house that Dear America bought, I should say, because that's how I got the house. I moved her into this house Mother's Day. And then when I witnessed my mom's relationship with her mom, my grandmother who raised me, I decided to move my grandma into the house with my mom. So now 88-year-old, 68-year-old, 44-year-old in the same house for the first time, sharing the same space since 1984. And my joke to my friends is it's the Golden Girls meets the Joy Luck Club. And yes, I'm trying to be Blanche.
This is a new memoir for you. This is a whole new subject.
All I know is I've been to Costco way too many times. And I'm really thankful that 99 Ranch has an app, right? This that Asian grocery store that, of course, my grandmother goes there. And that's where they cut the fish for you and they fry it if you want it fried.
Right.
I'm just really grateful that they have an app. God bless Costco.
That is so funny, Jose. I love it. I would really love to ask more questions about that another time. We're going to have to bring you back. And I do love Grant's idea that we'll write something about that in the future. But for now, your next book is a little more serious, perhaps a little bit more of an extension of Dear America. And we're asking this in closing. You earned your degree in political science and Black studies at San Francisco State. And this next book, as Grant mentioned, is at least tentatively called White is Not a Country. I do really like that title, just saying. I've read that it explores American race and identity by challenging the Black-white binary. And so we were wondering, how did studying Black studies shape your understanding of your own story as an Asian immigrant? And if you could tell us a little bit more about what the book is, we'd love that.
This has been 5 years in the making, this book. It's the longest journalistic project I think I've ever worked on. And it is reportage. In a way, I think I've been working on this book since I arrived here because I'm Filipino. And so I didn't become Asian until I got here. I was like, what is Asian American? And we're in Berkeley. This is where Asian American as an identity was created. And basically the book is about California is 60% Latino and Asian. Where do we fit in this Black versus white, North versus South domestic drama that has held this country hostage for 250 years? In a way, this country is provincial, right? And I'm saying that as somebody who hasn't really left the country since I was 12. We're stuck in this Black versus white narrative. We are stuck in the binary of America at a time when 1 out of 10 people is multiracial. In a way, to me, Blackness and whiteness are ideologies. That's something that I think I'd had to learn. And it started, I think, when I was at San Francisco State. Back at that time, I think I was the only non-Black student in these Black Studies courses. I changed my major. I was a journalism major freshman year. And then I got an internship at the Philadelphia Daily News that summer. And so growing up in the Bay Area that is so, Latino, Asian, get to Philly and they're like, what's Filipino? The Chinatown was like a block long. And I was introduced to like Black versus white. And just to see how pronounced and how it was like oxygen. And I grappled with that and went back to San Francisco State and was like, I need to understand, what did I just see? So then I changed my major. And I have to say, it's been fascinating because the book ends in Alabama. So I basically traveled the country. I work with the Pew Research Center because I think data is really important. So I mapped out, where are the 53 million immigrants state by state? I can tell you where all the Filipinos, Mexicans, Indians, and Chinese people are in this country. I can tell you that there are 1.7 million Filipinos in California that we know of, because I'm not sure if they count undocumented Filipinos in that. 1.7 million. That is larger than the populations of New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Delaware, right? So now, some people will call that the great replacement, as if we're replacing people. My argument is, I call it the great replenishment. Mexicans, Chinese, Indians, and Filipinos, those are the top 4 immigrant groups in the country. I think they are the Germans, Irish, Italians, and Polish of the 21st century. They're replenishing this country in the same way those people replenished this country 100, 150 years ago. The difference, of course, is that they're not coming from Europe. They're not coming from the place that colonized the rest of the world. And I think that difference is an ocean of difference. And I think that's what we're living through. So that's the book. And the book in many ways ends with whiteness and blackness are ideologies. In many ways, the future of the country depends. Where are Asians and Latinos going to go? Where do we go in that binary? This is something that I read when I was in high school. And because, James Baldwin, I don't know if you can see him, he's over there.
Oh, yeah.
No, a photo of him, not him, but, I'm sure. Nicholas Buggs, the biography of Baldwin is stunning. If you have not read it, read it. When I was in high school, 2 things. Baldwin said, I'm only Black if you think you're white. I'm only Black if you think you're white. So, of course, I'm like, well, what if you're neither? Right? Second, I don't know how I can help you if you think you're white. Baldwin. I was like, what does that mean? So meaning when I was in Iowa, were those people white or were they Dutch? Were they Norwegian? So what happened when they got here? What did they have to fight? What did all those immigrants that came when this country was ad hoc, when it was just making itself? And how come the Dutch and the Irish and the Italians, can they see that the Mexicans and the Filipinos and the Chinese and the Indians are going through the same thing? And mind you, Mexicans didn't have to cross an ocean. They just had to keep reminding people that the land that they're in, it was actually their land, right? So that's what I'm covering. And after this, though, I got to tell you, so because this is all reported, after this, I'm so excited for fiction. I just want to figure out like how can I get out of my reporter data minded head and go into virgin territory for me, which would be fiction and playwriting. I've been experimenting with writing a couple of plays, so that's kind of where I'm at writing wise.
Oh, Jose, that really does sound amazing. So thanks for laying all that out. And I was just sitting here nodding. They're such big and important questions. So good for you for tackling it. And thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We'll be right back with today's book trend.
Well, Brooke, I was leading a class the other day, and I was talking about all sorts of dark, scary things about the publishing world, such as, just how difficult it is to make any money as a writer, let alone a living. And I realized my darkness wasn't doing anyone any good. So I want us to end with a little fun in today's book trend, because, fun can be a good thing, an injection of creative fuel, just energy, just lightening up, getting away from things so that we have more energy when we come back to them. And yeah, maybe we should make a pledge to make 2026 more fun in general, because 2025 was really tough. So we need some fun as we come into this New Year's, I think. But first, a serious question. Have you ever named a pet or a person or anything after a literary figure, whether after an author or a character in a book?
I love this question, just because, we kind of reviewed it in advance, but it was so random. I was like, oh, I was not expecting this. I love it. I have not, but I think my next dog, obviously I should. We can't be in this world that we're in and not name our animals after literary figures, but I would name a girl dog Sula, after Toni Morrison's character, because that book really did change my life. And Sula is such an awesome, independent, defiant character in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, Grant, how about you?
I've never once even had an inkling to name anything after, a character or an author. Although, now that I'm talking, my daughter Simone is kind of loosely named after Simone de Beauvoir, not directly, but it was in the conversation. So I guess I'll just say Simone and Simone de Beauvoir. So, but I don't. Well, I'm not planning on getting any future cats or dogs. Maybe a fish. So maybe I'll name a fish some outlandish. Raskolnikov. I think I like Raskolnikov for a really plump goldfish.
Really rolls off the tongue.
Before you go, leave us, listeners. Please stay, because I don't know how they tabulated this organization or website, Rover. They came out with a list of the top bookish dog names and cat names, and so we're going to go through them, give you some ideas. And I had to look up some of these books. Very unfortunately for me, because I guess I'm just not really well versed in the romantasy genre in particular, because the first bookish dog name is Tern. It's a Thai, comes from Fourth Wing, which is a romantasy. Also from Fourth Wing, I don't know how to pronounce this, but Riddick, Ridoc, Thai with Tern. Ron Weasley, still doing well in the pet naming department, from Harry Potter, of course. Sybil from The Correspondent, which I want to read. It's an epistolary novel. Sounded really interesting. Number 4, More, also in a Thai, from A Court of Thorns and Roses. One more romantasy. Atticus Finch, very strong animal name, Atticus Finch.
I know an Atticus dog, so.
Do you? Yeah. There are just a lot of Atticus dogs and cats out there in the world. Hai, which is a Thai from The Emperor of Gladness, a book by Ocean Vuong, so it's got some literary cred there. Heathcliff, gosh, that was predictable, right? From Wuthering Heights. Zayden, this Fourth Wing novel is just full of pet names. The next time you need a name for a character or a pet, read Fourth Wing. and then Rysand, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it's from A Court of Thorns and Roses. And then Smeagol is from
Smeagol, that's so mean.
So, it's very like mean. Yeah, from Lord of the Rings.
But if you have a hairless dog.
Yeah. If you get a hairless dog, I think that's in order. So tell us about the cat world, Brooke.
I will. I'm just listening to you and I'm like imagining calling the dog, More or Redoc, like being at the dog park and people, or worse, Smeagol.
Yeah.
And yet it's number 10. Okay. So number 1, Zayden from The Fourth Wing. So there we go. That's dogs and cats.
Yeah.
Calloway from The Housemaid. Also, these are really interesting. It says up 532%, which means like one person named their cat Calloway last year, but like 19 people this year.
I don't know, because there's no census for animals that I know of.
Right.
So I don't know how they collected this, but anyway.
I love this quiz, though. Zella Fitzgerald, excellent. I mean, that one, Zelda is wonderful. I like that one a lot. Orly Ty from The Wild Shore. Okay, I don't even know that climate fiction novel, but other people probably do. Sherlock Holmes. I mean, really, a cat named Sherlock Holmes. Either Sherlock or Holmes. I could go with that.
Yeah.
Harlan, after the mystery writer Harlan Coben. That makes sense. You know, naming after a writer, that's good. Atticus Finch, again. But see, I think people name their cats either Atticus or Finch, not both. That's my personal theory.
Yeah.
Harry Potter. I have never met a Harry Potter cat ever.
Me either.
Just saying. If you have a Harry Potter cat, let us know. Stilgar from Dune. A lot of these people, you know, these sci-fi people. So we're going to have to up the ante on like memoir names for cats. And then finally, Katniss Everdeen, which, please, that is amazing. Katniss.
Katniss, yeah. You got a lot of Katniss, Kat.
I like that one. I'm putting that one in my back pocket. Sula and Katniss are my next animals.
Well, I think there's a proclivity. I think maybe people who read fantasy and romantasy really dominated the people reporting this, you know?
100%.
You know? So anyway, that could be a self-selected type of survey. But I'm not going to question the methodology. Let's just leave it. And we'll come back to this next year. Let's make this a tradition. So yeah, if you're getting a pet, please choose from a literary name. And, you know, I thought Gatsby might be on the list, or Hemingway. I actually know a dog named Hemingway. But I think there's a lot of baggage there. That's an old world name.
A lot of baggage.
Yeah.
Sylvia Plath. Lots of baggage.
Lots of baggage there. I've got a suicidal cat. We're supportive of animals in the literary world, you know, and there's a long history of authors, cats and dogs, you know, sitting by authors' sides as they pen their work. And my dog Buster has actually spent hundreds of thousands of words, mostly comfortable on my lap. And I know but Brooke has maybe the opposite scenario. She's got a handful, like 2 dogs and 2 cats at last count. And do you find them good creative companions, Brooke?
I do, especially my 13-year-old Golden. She really is my best girl, and I am very conscious of her age because she's slowing down so much. But her name is Bee because she looks like a little bumblebee. Well, she looked like a little bumblebee when we got her. Now she looks like an old dog. But she was delivered to us with this little yellow ribbon around her neck, and so that was how she got her name. And so the other dog is my wife's dog, my stepdog, if you will, Finnegan. I think that's a very writerly name.
Oh, yeah, Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah, so he could author some handbooks on the best places to sniff in the neighborhood for sure. Then we have 2 cats, Benny and Pepper. Benny is my cat and Pepper is my wife's. And so I'll have to confess very lazily that Benny came with the name Benny.
Yeah.
But, you know, he looked like a Benny, so sometimes that happens. But this is really inspiring me to get a little more creative next time. So thank you, Grant.
Buster also came with the name Buster. So
yeah, lazily.
Yeah, and I had wanted to change his name to something kind of extravagant and probably stupid, and my kids were like, no, he's Buster. So thanks for tuning in, listeners. We hope your furry or scaly companions give you just the right dose of creativity. We'll be back next week with another episode of Memoir Nation, and we have just one request. Please help us spread the word for Memoir Nation, you know, this podcast, but also our new memoir writing community. And if you're participating in Jan Your Story, keep writing. We're cheering you on. And if you haven't signed up for Memoir Nation on our website, please do. Select a package that fits your writing life, and we will see you next week.